The Yulvar had traveled far across the galaxy to find a species capable of challenging their peaceful way of life. They had encountered many intelligent races, but none had intrigued them as much as humanity. Their ship arrived silently, in orbit above Earth, its sleek curves gliding smoothly through the stars. Like a dark reflection of the planet below, they observed the world from above with great care and patience, watching as human cities flickered with light, and their oceans stretched vast and endless. Their sensors scanned the Earth's surface, and they were immediately struck by a curious thing. While the planet seemed teeming with life, there was something about the humans that stood out to the Yulvar. Most races they studied were either docile or governed by instinct, but humans seemed to possess something entirely different, an overwhelming drive for survival, no matter the cost. The Yulvar had long studied the behavior of other intelligent species, observing their interactions with nature and one another. They were always fascinated by how creatures would adapt in times of crisis. But humanity was unique in that regard. Humanity's history was filled with conflict, wars that seemed almost as though they were part of their natural rhythm. Humans fought against one another for territory, for resources, and for ideology. They created devastating weapons that left scars on the planet itself. Whole regions were altered beyond recognition. Yet the species persisted through all this destruction. Humanity adapted and grew stronger. They had survived even the worst of their own creations, and still they thrived. But it was the weapons themselves that intrigued the Yulvar most of all. The Yulvar began to question why a species so resourceful and capable of immense creativity would devote so much energy to creating instruments of death. They wondered why humans needed weapons capable of such devastation. When there were always alternatives. In their research, they discovered that these weapons were often used not simply for defense, but for display as well. Many of the most powerful human weapons were created not only to protect their people, but to send a message to others, an unspoken warning that no one should dare challenge them. The Yulvar were perplexed. Was this overcompensation or a genuine desire for security? Did humanity feel that only through overwhelming force could they ensure peace? Their curiosity grew deeper, and the Yulvar made the decision to make contact with Earth. They decided to send a delegation to the human capital of Washington, D.C., hoping that the leaders of this strange species would be able to shed some light on the mystery of their behavior. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, the Yulvar sensed a mix of nervous anticipation and excitement. Their civilization had been built on trust and nonviolence. The humans would undoubtedly be a challenge to understand. As they prepared to make their descent, they could not help but wonder if there was a deeper reason behind humanity's need for such immense power. Was it fear or something more, something they had yet to comprehend? The Yulvar ship touched down in Washington, D.C. with a soft hum, its metallic surface shimmering under the pale sunlight of early morning. The humans had been prepared for this moment. Their government had spent days coordinating the event, ensuring the visitors would receive a warm welcome. The moment the ship landed, a sense of awe rippled through the crowd that had gathered to witness the arrival of beings from another world. The Yulvar ambassadors disembarked, their tall, graceful forms towering over the crowd as they stepped onto the Earth, their skin a translucent shade that caught the light in strange ways. Their eyes, deep and ancient, scanned the crowd, searching for understanding in the faces of the humans who were now their hosts. The human diplomat who greeted them was a middle-aged man named Edward Clark, a seasoned negotiator with years of experience working with alien species. He extended a hand, his smile wide and welcoming, despite the pressure of representing humanity in the face of such an unprecedented event. The Yulvar ambassador, Sorath, studied the human's gesture with intrigue before reciprocating, the strange act of shaking hands not something their species commonly did. Still, there was a sense of recognition, a moment where two vastly different cultures tried to connect through an ancient human ritual. Clark led the delegation through the streets of Washington, guiding the Yulvar towards the heart of human power. The Yulvar observed with fascination as they moved through the bustling city, the towering buildings, the cars racing down the streets, the people going about their daily lives. They had never seen a civilization so advanced and yet so dissonant. The constant hum of activity, the noise, the traffic, the energy, it was a sharp contrast to the Yulvar's own serene cities, where the pace of life was calm and measured. Here, everything was in constant motion. Even the air seemed to vibrate with purpose. The Yulvar couldn't help but wonder if this was what human life was all about. Movement, survival, the constant push forward, no matter the cost. They arrived at the Capitol building, where they were seated in a grand room adorned with artwork and historical memorabilia. Clark began to speak, proudly outlining the accomplishments of humankind in the fields of science, art, and diplomacy. He spoke of human resilience, how despite wars, pandemics, and countless challenges, humanity had always managed to rise again. Yet it was when the conversation shifted towards military power that the Yulvar's curiosity truly piqued. Clark, seemingly unbothered by the shift, began to speak about humanity's greatest achievements in warfare. The Yulvar listened intently as Clark described the destructive power of human weaponry. He spoke of weapons capable of wiping out entire cities with a single blow, of missiles that could reach across oceans in minutes, of machines that could unleash hell on Earth. Soreth's mind raced as Clark continued, recounting the stories of the past. World wars, nuclear weapons, and the ways in which human nations had built these instruments not just to defend themselves, but to send a message to any who might consider challenging them. Clark explained that these weapons were not born from a desire to destroy, but from the belief that only through such overwhelming force could peace be achieved and maintained. Overkill, Clark said, his tone calm and matter-of-fact, is often necessary to ensure that no one doubts our ability to defend ourselves. Soreth's thoughts spun as they processed the words. It was not just the destructive power that struck them, but the human philosophy behind it. The belief that peace could only be achieved through the absolute certainty that no one would dare threaten them again. To the Yulvar, this was a foreign concept. In their culture, peace was achieved through dialogue and mutual respect, not through the threat of annihilation. Yet they couldn't help but wonder, could this truly be the only way for humanity to feel secure? They exchanged glances, sensing the same confusion in each other's eyes. The concept of overkill was alien to them, yet it was clear that for humanity, it was not just a method of defense, it was a fundamental part of their survival strategy. The Yulvar spent the following days observing Earth's history, delving deeper into humanity's past, and trying to understand the true nature of the weapons and conflicts Clark had mentioned. They sifted through records of humanity's most destructive moments, the Great World Wars, the age of nuclear arms, and the Cold War standoff, where the threat of mutual destruction hung over the world. What stood out to the Yulvar was not just the immense power behind these weapons, but the recurring theme. The belief that overwhelming force was the only guarantee of peace. They saw that humanity's wars were often fought with weapons designed not just to neutralize the enemy, but to utterly crush them, ensuring that no power could rise against them again. The Yulvar found this pattern disturbing. In their own history, they had faced moments of conflict, but it was through diplomacy and mutual compromise that they had overcome their challenges. They had never seen the need to create such extreme weapons, believing instead that understanding and empathy would lead to long-lasting peace. But as they dug deeper into the archives of human history, they began to uncover the darker motivations behind these weapons. The belief that the only way to prevent future violence was to make it clear that anyone who dared challenge humanity would face consequences beyond their imagination. The Yulvar couldn't help but question, were humans simply trapped in a cycle of violence, doomed to perpetuate destruction as a means of survival? Or was there something deeper, something more fundamental to their need for such weapons? They could not deny that humanity's ability to endure, even in the face of such catastrophic events, was remarkable. But the sheer scale of the destruction humans were willing to unleash was unlike anything the Yulvar had ever seen. As the days passed, the Yulvar continued to study human military tactics and strategies. They learned of the great wars fought in the 20th century, the technological leaps that had led to the development of weapons capable of obliterating entire cities in moments. They read about the terrifying possibility of nuclear war, where entire civilizations could be wiped out in an instant. But what baffled the Yulvar was the rationale behind it. The humans did not simply aim to destroy. They aimed to destroy in such a way that it would ensure no one ever dared to challenge them again. They spent hours discussing this with Clark, trying to make sense of it. They asked him questions about why humans felt the need to create such powerful weapons. Why did they believe that the only way to secure peace was through the constant threat of annihilation? Clark's responses were thoughtful, but to the Yulvar, they didn't entirely satisfy their curiosity. He spoke of the balance of power, of the need to prevent future wars by making sure no enemy could ever gain the upper hand. He spoke of the history of conflict, of how humanity had once been on the brink of total destruction and had only survived through sheer will and force. "I understand that it's difficult to grasp," Clark said, sensing the confusion in the Yulvar's expressions. "But for humanity, overkill is a safeguard. It's a way to ensure we never have to go through that kind of pain and loss again. Sometimes we have to be sure that no one else can ever make us feel powerless." The Yulvar listened intently, trying to digest his words. They began to realize that what they had initially seen as a reckless obsession with power might, in the eyes of humanity, be a form of protection. But even so, the Yulvar could not fully reconcile this understanding with their own values. For them, true strength came from the ability to solve problems without violence, to work together toward mutual understanding. Yet here they were, standing in a world where the most powerful species on the planet had come to believe that security was born from force, not cooperation. Their curiosity, once centered on the nature of overkill, was now beginning to evolve into a deeper question. Was humanity's path toward peace truly sustainable, or would they continue to rely on their immense power, forever teetering on the edge of self-destruction? The Yulvar spent the next few days deep in contemplation, processing the complexity of what they had learned about humanity. The idea of overkill, so central to human defense and security, seemed increasingly more than just a strategy. It was a part of their identity, woven into the very fabric of their culture. As they mulled over these ideas, a new opportunity arose to witness firsthand how humanity would respond to an actual crisis. The situation unfolded quickly. A neighboring alien species, the hostile Khalzar, had entered Earth's atmosphere, their intentions unclear but clearly threatening. The Khalzar had been in orbit for days, sending no communication, no diplomatic messages, just a slow, deliberate approach toward Earth's major cities. It was a tense standoff, and the Yulvar could feel the nervous anticipation building in the air. Clark, along with other human leaders, had called a high-level emergency meeting to discuss the situation. The Yulvar were invited to observe. They entered the command center, a cavernous room with walls covered in screens and consoles. The tension was palpable, the quiet hum of machinery and murmurs of officials mixing with the occasional beep of an alert or signal. On the central screen, the dark silhouette of the Khalzar ship loomed ominously above Earth. It was unlike any vessel the Yulvar had ever seen, alien and strange, massive and intimidating, its design completely different from any ship they had encountered in their travels. For hours, there was no communication, just the silent standoff between the two ships. The humans were hesitant, carefully analyzing their options. The Yulvar could sense the weight of the decision before them. Humans weren't afraid, but they were cautious. They had seen this before. There was no direct threat yet, but the Khalzar's presence was impossible to ignore. The humans didn't rush into action, but their leaders knew that any hesitation could be fatal. It was a high-stakes moment, one where the fate of millions could be decided in the blink of an eye. At last, the decision came. Clark and his team made the call. They would deploy humanity's most powerful defense system, one that had been developed in secret, and one the world had hoped would never be necessary. A planet-wide energy weapon capable of disabling any ship, no matter how advanced, in a single blast. The Yulvar watched in stunned silence as humans began activating the weapon. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Massive, sweeping beams of energy began to ripple across the planet's surface, converging into a singular point in the sky. The Yulvar could sense the immense power building, but there was something else in the atmosphere, a quiet determination, a finality in the way the humans moved. As the weapon fired, a brilliant surge of energy shot upward, striking the Kalzar ship with incredible precision. The Kalzar ship trembled, and for a moment, the Yulvar thought they might witness something tragic unfold. The ship didn't explode or crumble in on itself, as the Yulvar had anticipated. Instead, it seemed to flicker, its lights dimming, its systems failing. The Kalzar had been disabled in an instant, with minimal loss of life. The overwhelming force had been delivered not to destroy but to neutralize, to ensure that the Kalzar would never again threaten Earth. The room fell silent. The Yulvar were amazed, not just by the power of the weapon, but by the way it had been used. There had been no attempt to obliterate the Kalzar ship in an act of vengeance. Instead, the humans had chosen to strike in a way that would guarantee they could never return, but not through annihilation. The threat had been neutralized, but the destruction had been precise, calculated, and controlled. Clark turned to the Yulvar, noticing their stunned expressions. "This is why we do it," he said quietly. "Overkill isn't about destruction. It's about making sure no one ever has the chance to harm us again." The Yulvar were silent, absorbing this new understanding. They had expected a bloodthirsty display of power, but what they had witnessed was the careful application of overwhelming force to ensure peace, not through fear, but through certainty. The humans had made a decisive end to the conflict without killing needlessly. There was no loss of civilian life, no collateral damage. The Kalzar ship had been rendered powerless, ensuring they would never pose a threat again, and in the process, the humans had managed to avoid the destruction they feared. The Yulvar had seen power, but they had also seen control. The weapon was an instrument of security, not destruction. In that moment, the Yulvar began to grasp the full depth of humanity's philosophy. Overkill was not just a tool for victory. It was a way of ensuring peace by removing the possibility of future conflict. They could not fully understand it, but they could no longer deny the logic behind it. For humanity, the cost of peace was a heavy one, but they were willing to pay it to prevent the cycle of violence from ever beginning again. The days that followed the crisis brought a new sense of clarity for the Yulvar as they continued to observe humanity's response to the standoff with the Kalzar. The planet-wide weapon had been deployed with a surgical precision that both stunned and fascinated them. What struck them the most was not just the destructive potential of the weapon, but the calm, calculated manner in which the humans had handled the situation. There was no chaos, no emotional outbursts, only quiet determination and an unyielding belief that their approach would work. It was a philosophy the Yulvar had not encountered before. They had always believed that conflict could be resolved through understanding and dialogue, that true strength lay in the ability to negotiate, to find common ground even with the most difficult adversaries. But humanity's approach seemed almost the opposite, an approach built on a fundamental belief that power, once established, would ensure peace. It was not an act of malice but of caution, a way of ensuring that no threat would rise again. As the immediate tension from the Kalzar threat began to fade, the Yulvar turned their attention back to Clark and the others, trying to grasp the broader implications of what they had seen. They had asked him many questions about humanity's history, and Clark had spoken at length about the numerous conflicts that had shaped human society. He described the brutal wars that had ravaged the planet, the countless lives lost in the pursuit of power, and how each conflict had left a mark on human consciousness. For the Yulvar, the idea that such devastation had led humanity to the creation of increasingly destructive weapons was both a source of awe and deep concern. Clark's voice echoed in their minds as they processed the information. Overkill isn't about violence. It's about ensuring we never have to go through that again. The Yulvar found themselves questioning everything they had believed about the nature of peace and conflict. Was it possible that humanity's repeated reliance on overwhelming force was born from a collective trauma? Was their need to secure peace through force a reflection of the scars left by past wars, each one leaving an imprint on the human psyche that drove them to ensure no future conflict would ever come close to matching the devastation they had witnessed? It was a revelation that shifted the Yulvar's perspective on humanity's need for overkill. They decided to spend more time observing human life outside the military context, trying to understand whether this philosophy was reflected in other aspects of their culture. What they discovered was surprising. In daily life, humans were not simply a species of warmongers. They were inventive, resourceful, and driven by a remarkable desire to improve. The same people who had created weapons of unimaginable destruction also created art, medicine, technology, and systems of governance aimed at promoting peace and stability. They cultivated empathy for one another, built communities, and strived to better the conditions of their planet. The Yulvar began to realize that the destructive power humanity wielded was not a reflection of their nature, but a byproduct of their relentless pursuit of survival and peace. And yet it was this very paradox that haunted the Yulvar. Humanity's greatest strength seemed to lie in its greatest weakness. In their desire for peace, they had created the capacity for unimaginable violence. They had not sought destruction for its own sake, but as a way to secure a future freed from the horrors of war. They had learned to prevent future conflict by ensuring no one would dare challenge them again. The Yulvar could not help but wonder if there would ever be a way for humans to achieve peace without relying on such overwhelming force. Could they evolve beyond their need for overkill to create a future where trust and diplomacy prevailed without the shadow of annihilation hanging over every decision? They didn't have the answers yet, but they knew this question was at the core of humanity's evolution. Whether they liked it or not, the Yulvar had come to understand that the nature of human peace was inextricably tied to the very weapons that could end it. And so, as the Yulvar spent more time on Earth, they began to see humanity not as a species caught in an endless cycle of violence, but as a species struggling to find balance between their destructive past and their hopeful future. They understood now that the concept of overkill was not a reflection of evil or aggression, but of a people who had faced unspeakable suffering and chose to protect themselves at all costs. Whether that protection was the answer, however, remained to be seen. The days after the Khalzar standoff brought a somber quiet to Earth. The threat had passed, and humanity had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the Yulvar could feel a deeper tension lingering in the air. The Khalzar were defeated, but something had shifted within the human psyche. The immense power that had been unleashed was not something that could be forgotten so easily, nor could it be shrugged off as another military success. There was a sense of inevitability in the way the humans moved forward, as though the threat of destruction was now part of their identity, both a shield and a burden they could never put down. The Yulvar, still grappling with the full extent of what they had witnessed, began to shift their focus from the immediate aftermath to the broader implications of humanity's actions. They had seen how humans responded to aggression with overwhelming force, how their response to external threats was always to ensure their survival, no matter the cost. But what was truly at stake here? Did the Khalzar standoff represent the natural order of things on Earth, or was this a moment where humanity had crossed a threshold, a point beyond which they could never return to their former ways? Their questions deepened when they received word that another species, the Thalkar, had been monitoring the situation from afar. The Thalkar, an ancient race of scholars and diplomats, had contacted the Yulvar with a message that sent ripples through their peaceful society. They had been watching humanity, noting the aggressive response to the Khalzar threat, and their message was clear. Earth had now become a target of interest. The Thalkar were not hostile, but they were keenly aware that humanity's sudden show of force would send waves across the galaxy, attracting both admiration and fear in equal measure. The Yulvar met in private council, their thoughts heavy with the knowledge that humanity's actions had sparked a new chapter in their history. A chapter that would not just affect their relationship with other species, but could shape the future of the entire galaxy. The human response to the Khalzar had been swift, decisive, and calculated, but it had also drawn attention. And while the Yulvar admired humanity's ability to protect themselves, they couldn't help but wonder if that very power would be humanity's undoing in the long run. "We've seen their strength," Sorath, the Yulvar ambassador, said, his voice quiet but firm. "But have we seen their wisdom? Do they understand the path they're on?" The council fell silent, each member pondering the question. The Yulvar had watched humanity's evolution with fascination, but now they faced a troubling uncertainty. Could humans temper their overwhelming force with diplomacy and understanding, or would they continue to rely on sheer power as the ultimate solution to all their problems? As the Yulvar discussed this, the human delegation, led by Clark, had requested a formal meeting to address the growing concerns of the Thalkar and other species. The humans knew that their recent actions had made an impact, and they were keenly aware that the galaxy was watching them. It was a meeting that would determine how humanity's future would unfold, whether they would continue down a path where power was the ultimate tool, or if they could evolve into something greater, something beyond the need for overwhelming force. The Yulvar attended the meeting as observers, standing on the sidelines but watching intently. Clark stood before a diverse assembly of alien diplomats, including representatives from the Thalkar, who had expressed concern about Earth's potential to disrupt the galactic balance of power. There was tension in the room, palpable and thick, as the Thalkar spoke of the consequences of humanity's actions. "You cannot simply destroy your way to peace," one Thalkar representative said, her tone sharp. "The balance of the galaxy is fragile. Your weaponry, your approach, threatens not just your world, but others. You have been given a chance to prove that you can coexist, but if you continue to rely on this overkill, you will only isolate yourselves." Clark listened intently, the weight of the Thalkar's words settling heavily on his shoulders. "We understand your concerns," he replied, his voice steady but filled with the undercurrent of determination. "But we will not stand idly by and allow ourselves to be destroyed. We cannot afford to be passive when our survival is at stake. Our strength is our peace." The room fell into a tense silence as the Thalkar considered Clark's words. The Yulvar, standing at the edges of the gathering, exchanged glances. They had expected this moment, the moment when humanity's resolve would be tested. Clark's words were honest, sincere, and unmistakably human. But as the Yulvar listened, they began to see the weight of what humanity was facing. It was not just the future of Earth that was at stake. It was their place in the galaxy, their place among the stars. The question lingered in the air, unspoken but pressing. Could humanity learn to balance their desire for peace with their need for power? Would they evolve beyond the need for overwhelming force, or would they remain locked in a cycle of survival by any means necessary? As the meeting drew to a close, the Yulvar knew that the answers were not yet clear, but they also knew that the path humanity chose would shape not just their future, but the future of the entire galaxy. The days following the tense meeting with the Thalkar were filled with uncertainty. The Yulvar watched as humanity's leaders, including Clark, tried to navigate the delicate situation that had arisen. The diplomatic pressure was mounting. Other species in the galaxy, too, had begun to scrutinize Earth, and many began to wonder whether humanity's actions would tip the balance of power in the cosmos. Would they use their overwhelming force to maintain peace, or would they evolve into a species capable of achieving lasting peace through negotiation and trust? The Yulvar, deeply invested in understanding humanity's next steps, observed the unfolding events with both curiosity and concern. It became clear that humanity, for all its technological might and military might, was not united on how to respond to the growing galactic pressure. Clark and the human delegation worked tirelessly behind closed doors, navigating diplomatic corridors and trying to reassure the galaxy that humanity's intentions were peaceful. But even within the human ranks, a debate was raging. One faction, led by a powerful coalition of military leaders, advocated for the continuation of the strong, protective stance humanity had adopted. They argued that Earth's strength, its willingness to use overkill, had kept its enemies at bay for centuries. If humanity wanted to secure its future, they would need to keep their military capabilities sharp, always ready to strike if necessary. This group, though smaller, wielded immense influence. They saw Earth's strength not as a burden, but as its greatest asset, an asset they were not willing to compromise. On the other side of the debate, there was a growing faction of diplomats, scientists, and leaders who argued that the path of destruction, even when justified by defense, could lead humanity into isolation and mistrust. They spoke of the need for diplomacy and cooperation with the wider galaxy, fearing that if humanity's reputation as a militaristic power continued to grow, they would alienate themselves from other species. They wanted to prove that humanity could be more than its weapons, more than just a species whose survival instinct relied solely on force. The debate was far from settled, and the Yulvar, witnessing the conflict from a distance, felt the weight of the moment. In their own history, they had faced a similar crossroads, a time when their species had to choose between their peaceful philosophy and the hard realities of conflict. But the difference between them and humanity was clear. The Yulvar had always been able to fall back on their wisdom, their belief in the strength of dialogue and empathy. Humanity, however, had never been presented with such a choice on a galactic scale before. The Yulvar, who had long valued unity and understanding, began to fear that humanity might be at a critical juncture in its development. If they chose the path of isolation and unrelenting power, they could alienate themselves from the galaxy forever. But if they embraced diplomacy, might they be sacrificing the very force that had kept them safe for centuries? The most critical moment came when Earth's government called for an emergency summit. Delegates from all corners of the galaxy would gather in orbit around Earth to discuss the growing concerns about humanity's military power. The Thalkar were to be present, along with representatives from various star systems, each bringing their own concerns, their own hopes for Earth's future. Clark knew that this summit would determine the fate of humanity. There could be no more equivocating, no more half measures. He had to convince the galaxy that humanity could be trusted, that they were not merely a species of warriors, but a species capable of peace. As the summit began, Clark stood before a holographic projection of the assembly. Leaders of dozens of species stared at him from across the room, their expressions a mix of skepticism and expectation. The Yulvar, still present in their role as observers, watched intently. Clark spoke carefully, his voice firm but measured. "We, humanity, have made mistakes in our past. We have created weapons of destruction, weapons that we have used to protect ourselves, to secure peace in our own way. But we are not defined by our weapons. We are defined by our capacity to change, to learn from our past, and to evolve." There was a long pause, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Clark's words hung in the air, carrying with them the weight of a species on the verge of something momentous. He continued, "We will not abandon our strength, but we are ready to build trust, to work with others, to forge new paths toward peace. We ask for the chance to show you that our future is not bound by the past." The silence in the room was deafening. The Thalkar, their stoic faces inscrutable, exchanged looks. The representatives from other star systems murmured amongst themselves, unsure how to respond. The Yulvar, too, were silent, watching as this critical moment unfolded. But then, unexpectedly, the Thalkar representative stood, her voice calm yet heavy with the weight of millennia of wisdom. "Perhaps, Earth," she said slowly, "it is not just your strength that defines you, but your willingness to recognize your place in the larger cosmos. We are watching your next steps carefully. The galaxy awaits." The moment was electric. It was a beginning, not an end. The Yulvar, though unsure of what the outcome would be, felt a spark of hope. Maybe humanity could evolve beyond their reliance on power. Maybe they could change. But only time would tell if this moment of recognition, this willingness to evolve, would be enough to secure humanity's place in the galactic community. The aftermath of the summit left Earth in a tense but hopeful state. The galaxy had watched as humanity stood on the precipice of a new chapter, unsure if they would cling to their history of overwhelming power or step into a future defined by cooperation and diplomacy. For the first time in generations, humanity found itself questioning its approach to the universe, a universe that had now become their stage, with the spotlight firmly on them. In the weeks that followed, Clark and the other leaders worked tirelessly to implement the agreements forged during the summit. There was no immediate shift in the way the human military operated, but small steps were being taken toward greater diplomatic engagement. Humanity's representatives began opening formal channels with other species, engaging in conversations that went beyond survival and defense. Earth, once seen as a potential threat, was now seen as a species willing to learn, willing to evolve. It wasn't perfect, and many were still skeptical, but there was hope that humanity could redefine its role among the stars. The Yulvar, who had been observing Earth for so long, felt an unfamiliar sense of cautious optimism. They had witnessed humanity's struggle to reconcile their past with their future, their tension between the destructive power they had developed and the potential for peace they had yet to fully realize. They understood now that humanity's need for overkill was not born from malice, but from a deep-seated fear of their own vulnerability. It was a fear they could not easily shed, but they had seen glimpses of something else, glimpses of a species that could rise above its past. Still, the question lingered in the air. Could humanity truly evolve? Could they build a future where force was not the first solution, but the last resort? The Yulvar didn't know, but they had seen enough to believe that it was possible. Then, a year after the summit, another test came, one that would shape the future of humanity's relationship with the galaxy. A small fleet of unknown ships appeared at the outer edges of Earth's solar system. The ships, initially thought to be hostile, approached without communication, their intentions unknown. Humanity, for all its progress, found itself in a familiar position, uncertain and ready to defend. But this time, something different happened. Instead of immediately activating their most powerful weapons, Clark and his team took a bold step. They sent a diplomatic envoy, including representatives from the Yulvar, to make contact. The ships, it turned out, were from a species long believed to be extinct, the Var, the very species that had taught the Yulvar the value of peace and mutual understanding. The Var had come not to threaten, but to learn about humanity. They had heard of Earth's transformation, and they were curious. The Yulvar, standing alongside the humans, saw the decision unfold before them. Humanity had chosen diplomacy over destruction, the first time they had done so without the weight of previous trauma driving their actions. The Var's representatives were cautious, but as the meeting progressed, they came to recognize the sincerity of humanity's efforts. It was a moment of profound change. Humanity had passed the test, not just with the galaxy, but with themselves. The Yulvar watched as Clark and the human delegation negotiated, using the same careful diplomacy they had used to prevent war with the Kelzar. The tension was palpable, but there was also an undeniable sense of progress. For the first time, humanity was no longer just a species marked by its capacity for destruction. They were a species trying to build something better. As the meeting concluded, the Yulvar exchanged looks, their expressions a mix of admiration and relief. The humans had done it. They had evolved, not into a passive, defenseless species, but into one capable of wielding their strength with wisdom and restraint. The galaxy had witnessed this transformation, and slowly, species that had once feared humanity began to see them as equals. Clark, standing at the edge of the diplomatic table, turned to the Yulvar. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "There will always be challenges. There will always be threats. But now we have the choice, not just to destroy, but to grow, to understand, to find another way. The Yulvar nodded, sensing the shift that had taken place. There was no certainty about the future, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The Yulvar had come to Earth as observers, skeptical of the humanity they had encountered. Now they saw a species on the cusp of something far greater, something that could, perhaps, one day lead the galaxy into an era of cooperation, not conflict. As the stars above Earth glittered in the distance, the Yulvar knew one thing for sure. Humanity had passed the hardest test of all. They had learned that the true strength of peace lay not in overwhelming power, but in the ability to choose a different path. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.